Chapter 8. A Stormy Warning. As we had dinner the night before, we began with a prayer and Bible reading. Uncle Jacob gazed at Carrie, glanced at May, and then turned to me. "You might as well start right off," he said. "It's your turn." "My turn?" I looked at Aunt Sarah. "He wants you to read an excerpt from the great book, dear." Laura always followed Carrie. "I could read again if she doesn't want to," Carrie volunteered with a smirk. "It's all right," I said quickly. "I'd like to read." "What do I read?" Uncle Jacob handed me the Bible with his thumb on the section he wanted me to read. I began, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband do safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good, not evil, all the days of her life." I gazed quickly at Carrie because I felt the heat of his eyes on me as I read. "She seek wool and flax and work willingly with her hands." "Yes," Uncle Jacob said, nodding, obviously pleased with how I read. Carrie glanced down as I continued until the chapter was completed. "Good," Uncle Jacob said. "Words to remember. Amen." His eyes fixed on me. I knew what he thought of my mother. Did he choose this chapter because he thought I would be just like her? I was afraid to ask. As soon as we began to eat, Uncle Jacob and Carrie got into a conversation about a lobster catch and the construction of more traps. While they talked, I tried to converse with May. I saw Carrie watching us from the corner of his eye, and something I did brought a smile to his face. But Uncle Jacob suddenly looked furious. "Will you tell your daughter to eat and not talk at dinner?" he continued at Aunt Sarah. "It's distracting." "Yes, Jacob." Aunt Sarah signed his orders to May, who immediately dropped her gaze to her food and stopped trying to communicate with me. It occurred to me that I had not yet seen Uncle Jacob use sign language with May. Up until now, it had been only Carrie, Aunt Sarah, and I. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's my fault. I was trying to learn sign language." "Well, do it after dinner," Uncle Jacob snapped and turned back to Carrie to talk about new traps. After dinner, I helped Sarah clear away the dishes and put away the food. She went on and on about the wonderful things Laura had learned to do with fish. Got so her fillet bass was so good, it won in a contest. You should have tasted her fish pie, too. The crust always came out so light. The girl had magic in her fingers. "I cooked for my daddy often," I said. "Oh, did you, dear?" "Yes, I bet you did." I don't remember Haley being much of a cook. She had other things on her mind. "Like what?" I pursued. "Not fit to discuss," Aunt Sarah sewed her lips shut. "What does that mean?" I demanded. She shook her head and then gazed at the doorway before lowering her voice to a whisper. "Truth is, Jacob don't even like me mentioning her in those days." "Well, I'd like to hear more about her," I said. "No, you wouldn't, dear. I must show you some of Laura's needlework," she said to change the subject. "Did I tell you she used to do that? I have it all on my bedroom walls. But this one she never got to finish. It's in my closet. Have you ever done needlework?" "No," I said, sulking. "Oh, you should try needlework, dear. I bet you'd be good at it, too." "I don't think so," I said. "Is there anything else I can help you with, Aunt Sarah?" "What? Oh, no, dear, thank you," she said. "That's right, I have to do homework now." "Yes." "Then go on, dear. I'll see you before you go to sleep," she said. I hurried upstairs, and when I ascended the stairway, I noticed a ladder had been lowered from the roof of the second-floor landing. It led up to the door in the ceiling. I approached it slowly and gazed up to the lighted attic. Curious, I started up the rungs and stopped to peer into the room. Two oil lamps illuminated the table, chair, chests, and boxes, and all sorts of antiques and old paintings. But the most interesting thing to me were the model boats constructed of balsa wood. One was partially completed on the table. The others were lined up on shelves, all painted too, with some tiny sailors manning the sails. There was a very worn-looking couch on the right and a telescope pointing at a sole window. "What are you doing?" I turned to see Carrie staring up at me from the bottom of the ladder. "I was just wondering what was up here." "Do you do those boats?" "First, they're not boats, they're ships. And second, the attic is a private place, if you don't mind." "I'm sorry." I started down the rungs, but slipped on the last one and fell into his arms. For a moment, our faces were inches apart. The moment that he was holding me in his arms, he realized that I landed hard on my feet on the floor. "That's why I don't like anyone going up there," he said, moving past me quickly. "It's dangerous." His cheeks were crimson. "I'm sorry. Is that your hobby?" I asked before he reached the top. He dropped a yes back at me before pulling the ladder up after him. "I don't have the measles or anything, you know," I cried. He hesitated for a moment before closing the door. Good riddance. I marched to my room and lost myself in my homework. Once in a while I heard the sounds of Carrie moving above me, and I gazed up at the ceiling listening until he grew quiet again. The telephone rang below the living room, and I waited, holding my breath, and I heard Aunt Sarah call my name. "Telephone, dear." "Mommy," I cried. Finally, I hurried down the stairs. "It's Haley," Aunt Sarah said. "Hurry, it's long distance." I rushed to the living room, and Uncle Jacob sat in his chair smoking his pipe, thumbing through the mail order catalog. He glanced at me and then back at his pages, but he didn't get up. Aunt Sarah stood at the doorway watching. I would have no privacy for this phone call. Nevertheless, I received the receiver. "Mommy." "Hi, honey. See, I told you I would call you the first chance I got. Aunt Sarah says that you've already started school there and you're up to doing the work." "Yes, Mommy, where are you?" "We're on our way to New York City," she said excitedly. Her voice dropped. The people in Boston weren't available. They told Richard, so they were never going to meet me. But he has people to meet in New York and then Chicago. After that, we'll head to Los Angeles. Los Angeles? But Mommy, when will we be together again? I asked the question as quietly as I could. "Soon, honey, real soon, I promise. I could still meet you someplace, Mommy. I could take a bus and... Now don't make things harder than they are for me, honey. I've already suffered serious disappointment. Please cooperate." "But I need my things," I said. "You didn't leave me any money, Mommy. I can't call my friends. I can't call Alice or Grandma Arlene. It's long distance." "I'm calling Grandma Arlene as soon as I get to New York," she promised. I heard a horn blaring and someone shouting. "Coming," Mama shouted back. "I've got to go, honey. I've already held us up longer than I should have. I'll call you as soon as I can. Be good, honey. Bye." "But Mommy..." The phone went dead. I held it tightly. Silent screams stuck in my throat and tears froze behind my eyes. "Hang it up properly," Uncle Jacob instructed. "I'm waiting on an important call." I cradled the receiver with my back to him and walked out of the living room quickly, not glancing at Aunt Sarah either. "Just a minute there," Uncle Jacob growled. "Get yourself right back in here, young lady." I sucked my breath, turned, and marched back. My heart thudded madly, drumming out the tune of fright in my ribcage. "Yes, sir?" "It's proper to thank people when you use their things. Sarah ain't your secretary." "I'm sorry." "Thank you, Aunt Sarah." "You're welcome, dear. Is everything all right with Haley?" "Yes," I replied. "Good." "Huh," Uncle Jacob grunted. "I'll bring a glass of hot milk tonight," she offered. "You don't have to do that, Aunt Sarah. I always brought Laura a glass of hot milk. I'll bring one to May as well." Her huge eyes stared woefully at me. I glanced at Uncle Jacob. He took ready to pounce. "Oh, then thank you, Aunt Sarah." Her face brightened, the darkness evaporating from her eyes. I forced a smile and hurried up the stairway. When I reached my room, I closed my door behind me and threw myself on the bed, burying my face in the pillow to smother my sobs. I didn't want to be here. I hate it. No wonder my father stopped speaking to this family. He was nothing like Uncle Jacob. I would be happier if Mama had dumped me in an orphanage, I thought. My shoulders shook with my muted cry. Suddenly, I felt something touch my shoulder, and I turned around to see little May staring at me with her face full of sympathy. She had come in so quietly that I had not heard her. Her hands moved rapidly, wondering why I was unhappy, what made me cry. "I miss my mother," I said. She tilted her head, and I let out a deep breath and located the book on sign language. I found the gestures and produced them. May nodded and signed how sorry she felt for me and then offered me a hug. How sweet, I thought. How sad that the only one in this house who made me feel at home was the only one who couldn't hear the sound of my voice. Nor could she hear the sounds of the scuffling footsteps above me, but she saw where my gaze had gone and understood. "Carrie," she said, demonstrating the construction of the model ship. "Yes. Do you go up there?" I signed. "Or doesn't he let you up there?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No?" She shook her head and gestured. "Only." She pointed at Laura's photograph. "Only Laura?" May nodded. "Only Laura," I thought aloud and gazed at the ceiling. May grunted and then gestured about his great sorrow. I gazed at the ceiling again. Carrie was in pain, I thought, for a moment at least, and I stopped feeling sorry for myself. May returned to her room to complete her homework. After I finished mine, we practiced sign language until it was time for her to go to bed. I washed and dressed myself, and then Aunt Sarah brought my glass of warm milk. There was something that rolled under her arm. She took it out and showed me Laura's unfinished canvas of needlework. It was a picture of a woman on a widow's walk gazing at the sea. "Laura drew the picture herself," Aunt Sarah explained. "Isn't it beautiful?" "Yes," I said. "Don't you want to finish it for her, dear?" "I can't get myself to do it," she said with a deep sigh. "I'd be afraid I'd mess it up, Aunt Sarah." "Oh, you won't, I'm sure. I'll leave it here and bring up the threads tomorrow and show you how to stitch." "I've never done something like that before," I said, but she didn't seem to hear or care. "My goodness," she said, her gaze falling on the two nearly identical stuffed cats. "Where did this one come from?" "It was mine, a present from my daddy. I brought it with me in my suitcase. Isn't that remarkable?" Carrie won the other one for Laura at a fair one summer. "And this teddy bear you brought along with you too?" "Yes." "Geminis," she said, "all of you." She gazed around the room sadly, looked at me and smiled, and then left, wishing me a good night's rest. I was tired. It had been an exhausting day, my emotions on a roller coaster. I had gone through the tunnel of fear, been angry, sad, and curious. I enjoyed being with little May and appreciated that she sincerely welcomed me. That was the only ray of sunshine in this gloomy world of sadness. Impulsively, I picked up my fiddle and played a mournful tune. It was the mood that I felt, and the music came from deep within me. I closed my eyes and pictured Daddy sitting on the sofa in our trailer living room, a small smile on his face and his eyes full of pride as I played. Afterward, he would pull me to him and give me one of his bear hugs, smothering my cheek and forehead with kisses. Suddenly, there was a loud rapping on the wall. "Stop that noise," Uncle Jacob ordered. "It's time for everyone to sleep." My memories of Daddy popped like soap bubbles. I put away the fiddle and crawled under my comforter. Then I turned down the oil lamp and closed my eyes and listened to the roar of the ocean. The house was very quiet for a few moments. Then I heard what I recognized as a distinct sound of someone sobbing. "Just go to sleep," Uncle Jacob commanded gruffly, his voice seeming like it was coming out of the walls. The sobbing stopped. The ocean came roaring through my window again, the same ocean that had taken Laura from this house and the melancholy world in which I now found myself. Following Aunt Sarah's instructions the next morning, I made lunches for both Carrie and myself. It was something Laura had always done, and I'd assumed it'd be one of my chores. We were to have a sandwich and an apple, and we were given 50 cents to buy a drink. May's lunch was provided for her at the special school. When we left the house, May took my hand instead of Carrie's. He paused for a moment, visibly annoyed, but said nothing about it. "Let's go, we don't want to be late," he muttered, and plodded along ahead of us, moving so quickly May and I had to practically run to keep up. We dropped her off first and then started for the school. I tried to make conversation. "How long have you been constructing model ships?" I asked, and he glanced at me as if it was a stupid question. "A long time, and they're not toys," he added. I didn't say they were. I know grown-ups who have hobbies too. Grandpa George used to carve out flutes from hickory branches. He even made my fiddle. "Why do you call this person Papa George?" he said disdainfully. "He's not your grandfather. This Sunday you'll meet your grandfather." "Papa George is the only grandfather I've known. He and Grandma Arlene are my real grandparents as far as I'm concerned," I replied firmly. "They don't have any children of their own?" "No." "So why didn't Haley leave you with them instead of while she was running off to be a movie star?" he asked, his eyes sparkling wickedly. "Grandpa George is very sick. He suffers from black lung," I replied. He grunted. "That's a convenient excuse," he said. Furious, I seized him at the elbow and pulled him to stop, spinning him around. He was genuinely shocked at my outburst and physical strength. I shocked myself. "It's not an excuse. He's very sick. I don't know why you don't like me, Carrie Logan, but the truth is I don't care to know. If that's the way it has to be, then that's the way it has to be. But don't think that I'll let you ridicule me or say bad things about people I love." He went from astonishment to shock and the look of appreciation and pleasure before returning to his stoic self. "I can't be late for school," he said. "I've already got 2 demerits." He walked on and I hurried to catch up. "You have 2 demerits? What for?" He was silent. "What did you do?" I pursued, keeping the pace with him. I was curious what possible infraction of rules Mr. Perfect could have committed. "Fighting," he finally replied. "I wonder why that comes as no surprise," I said. I couldn't resist. He glared at me, and I thought if looks could kill, I would be long dead and buried. He then pumped his legs harder, remaining a foot or 2 ahead of me the rest of the way to school. Teresa Patterson was friendly and spoke to me between classes, but since she didn't have to be my guide any longer, she stayed with her own friends. She didn't have to say it, but I knew that if she brought me along, her friends might resent it. Just as in my school, and probably most schools, clumps of girls and boys clung to each other in cliques, feeling safer and more comfortable hanging out with those who perceived to be like their own kind. At lunch, I sat at the table alone until Lorraine, Janet, and Betty brought themselves and 2 other girls over to join me. I saw by the mischievous twinkle in Betty's eyes that they were plotting something. "So, after nearly 2 days here, how do you like our school?" Lorraine asked innocently. "It's okay. The teachers are nice," I said. "Are the boys better looking than the boys in West Virginia?" Janet asked. "I haven't had a chance to look," I said. When they all looked skeptical, I added, "It's hard starting someplace new during the last quarter of the year. I've got the same finals that you'll take." One of the new girls looked sympathetic, but Betty tucked in the corner of her mouth and said, "You don't look like you're going to have a problem with schoolwork." "Grandpa might have a problem, though," Janet said. "He's barely passing. He might not even graduate, I hear." "Billy Watkins told me that Grandpa's going to fail English," Lorraine said, nodding. "Maybe you can tutor him," Betty suggested. "That's right, like show him how to do it," Janice said, and they all laughed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. The girls glanced at each other and ate. "Do you sleep in the same room?" Betty asked me. "Same room? With Grandpa. We heard Laura and Carrie slept in the same room ever since they were born." "Of course not," I said, "and they didn't." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," Lorraine said. "Laura had a very nice room. That's the room I use. None of you have ever been to my aunt and uncle's house." "No," Betty said. "Laura was a strange girl," Janet offered. "That whole family is strange." "She didn't want anything to do with the girls her age," Lorraine said. She was like an old lady, cooking and cleaning, canning fruit with her mother. I hardly saw her at any of our dances, Janet complained. Robert Royce was the only boyfriend she ever had, Lorraine said. Unfortunate for him, Betty added. Whereas Grandpa has never been with anyone we know, Janet said. Now we have someone who will tell us, Lorraine said, eyeing at me. Tell us, Melody. Tell you what? Does Grandpa spend a lot of time in his bathroom, maybe sneaking in with girly magazines? More laughter. The blood rushed in my neck and face. When he goes to sleep, do you hear the bed springs squeaking? Betty continued. The girls giggled. You're all disgusting, I said. Their laughter stopped. Oh, come on, Melody. I'm sure you're curious about him too, Janet said. He's not bad looking, Lorraine offered, gazing across the cafeteria at Carrie. He stared back at us. Maybe you can get him to loosen up and relax. We could help you. What do you mean? I asked. The girls were quiet for a moment, all their eyes on the teacher monitor. Betty nodded at Lorraine. She opened her school bag, and what she had set between me and her took something out quickly. She pressed it in my hand, and I gazed down to look like what would have been Papa George's self-rolled cigarettes. I don't smoke, I said. That's not a cigarette, stupid, Betty said, and keep it below the table so Mr. Rotter doesn't see. What is it? It's a joint, Lorraine whispered loudly. I don't want it, I said, and thrived it back, and she pushed my hand away. Just keep it in case you get a chance to offer it to Grandpa. It'll loosen him up. Just tell us what happens, that's all, Betty said. Put it away quick, Lorraine said, and Mr. Rotter strutted over to the table between us. Little butterflies of panic fluttered in my head, gazing around, and it seemed as if everyone were looking at me, waiting to see what I would do. Hello, girls, Mr. Rotter said, smiling down at us. Are you guys making the new student feel at home? Yes, Mr. Router, Lorraine fluttered her eyelids. Is that true, Melody? He asked me. I was afraid my voice would crack. Yes, sir, I said. Good. He continued through the cafeteria, and I let out my breath. Very nice, you did well, Betty said. The other girls apparently agreed. We're having a beach party Saturday night. We'll meet at about 8 at Janet's house. Do you want to come? It'll be a chance for you to meet some of the normal boys, Betty said. I don't know if I can. I'll ask my aunt. Don't tell her where you're going, Janet said, or she won't let you come. Just say that you're coming over to my house to study for a test. That always works. I don't like to lie, I said. She smirked. You haven't been living in the Logans long. After a while, you'll get to like it. The bell signaled the end of lunch period, and everyone rose to leave. I was the last to get up, not realizing until that moment I still had the joint of marijuana clutched in my hand. I dropped it into my sandwich bag and then dropped the bag into the garbage on the way out of the cafeteria. At the doorway, someone bumped into me hard, and I turned to look into the most perfect face I'd ever seen. His blue eyes were positively dazzling, and his smile was the warmest and sweetest one I'd ever seen. Strong, full lips were turned up gently at the corners, revealing teeth as white as piano keys. A wave of dark brown hair floated over his forehead. He was tall, broad shoulders, and with a narrow waist. His face wasn't as tanned as Carrie's, but he had a creamy, rich complexion that looked like a male model or movie star. Excuse me, he said, did I hurt you? No, it's all right. I'm afraid I had my mind on the upcoming European history exam. I'm not usually this clumsy. It's okay, I'm fine. You're the new girl, right? Yes, I said, smiling. I'm Adam Jackson. Melanie Logan, I returned. Welcome to Providence Town, he said. I see you've already made friends with some of the girls. Are you going to their beach party Saturday night? I don't know. I'll see. I hope I see you there, he said, his face glittering with a handsome smile as he moved away to join his friends, who I saw included a very pretty brunette. She glared at me as she threaded her arm through his and moved down the hall and away. I stared after him until Lorraine nudged me. The girls had been standing nearby watching. Be careful, Lorraine said. That's Adam Jackson. I know, he told me. Did he tell you that he puts the nick in the bow of the sailboat for every girl that he takes to bed? What? One more nick and that boat might sink, Betty added. We continued towards class, but I couldn't catch my breath. But maybe she won't mind becoming one of Adam's nicks, Janet quipped. Would you, Melody? What? Everyone laughed again. I was beginning to feel as light and helpless as a balloon caught in a crosswind, blown one way then the other, and I had only been here a couple of days. Mr. Malamud, my chemistry teacher, spent some time with me in class to be sure I was up to date. It was the last period of the day, and Carrie wasn't waiting for me when I finally emerged from the building. I gazed around for a few moments and then hurried along. I assumed he picked up May from school already, so I just took the shortest route back. Oh, Melody, dear, I was worried about you, Aunt Sarah said when I entered the house. Carrie and May have been home for a while. I had to stay after school for a few minutes to get some extra help from my science teacher, I explained. You should have let Carrie know, she told me. I didn't see or speak to Carrie much after we arrived at school, Aunt Sarah. That's not all my fault either, I added. I went upstairs to change into a pair of jeans. I found the needlework picture spread on the bed with a box of colored thread inside. Moments later, Aunt Sarah was at the doorway. I'll show you how to make a stitch, she said. I'm not really good at this, Aunt Sarah. Once you start, you will be, I'm sure, she insisted. I was about to continue my protest when Carrie appeared in the hallway behind her. If she doesn't want to do it, don't keep forcing it on her, Mother, he snapped. Aunt Sarah's mouth fell open and her hand fluttered up to the base of her throat. I didn't mean to. It's okay, Aunt Sarah, I said, shooting my own sparks of anger from his eyes. I'd be happy to learn. Carrie took a look of amusement and then added fuel to the fire before he hurried downstairs and out of the house. Aunt Sarah smiled and came into my room to demonstrate the needlework. I picked it up quickly and did enjoy it. As soon as it was finished, I'll get it framed and put it out with the others, Aunt Sarah promised. But you don't have to work on it now. You've been cooped up in school all day. Get some fresh air. Laura liked to walk on the beach and hunt for seashells. May was still completing her chores, so I went out by myself. The sky still had patches of deep blue, but most of it had become covered with what looked like a storm of clouds. Bruised and sooty puffs that rolled angrily from the horizon. The ocean looked more tempestuous, too. I could see Carrie and Roy Patterson at the lobster boat bobbing beside the dock. I walked out a little way. Carrie left the boat and started back towards me in the house. There's going to be a storm, he said as he approached. It's a nor'easter, he added, continuing past. I said nothing and continued to walk toward the ocean. Didn't you hear what I said, he called? I turned. Look at the sea. Even a lolubber like you would be able to see the rain coming. Don't call me a landlubber. He smiled. What are you? I'm a person just like you, only I was brought up in a different place. I'm sure you wouldn't know your way around the coal mine, but I wouldn't call you silly names just to pump myself up. I'm not doing it to pump myself up. I turned away. To my surprise, he was at my side in moments. Keep walking in this direction and you'll get caught in a downpour. Look at the beakers. The ocean is talking to us, telling us what to expect. See how the turns are heading from safer ground, too? Where's Uncle Jacob? I asked, gazing toward the dock. He took today's catch to town. It wasn't good, only 4-size lobsters in the traps. How do lobsters get trapped? I asked. We bait them with stinky dead fish and set them at the ocean bottom. The lobsters crawl to the living room and the one that gets caught. Living room? That's what we call the part of the trap. Later we pull the traps to see how many lobsters got in there and then we take them to market. How do you prepare them? Well, you gotta put rubber bands on the claws so they can't pinch. One claw is a cruncher claw. Strong, dull, and the other is like scissors, sharp and quick. I didn't know they were so dangerous. It's not really dangerous if you're careful. I'd been pinched a bit, but only once it had drawn blood. He showed me his right hand so I could see a faint scar along his forefinger. Did Laura go lobstering with you? I asked. He blinked rapidly and turned toward the ocean. No, not much, he replied. She didn't know the ocean as well as you did. We should go back to the house. There goes Roy. Carrie nodded at the tall, broad black man who hurried away from the dock. Where did the Pattersons live? In the Saltbox houses on the other side of town. What happened to Teresa's mother? I asked. You're stuffed full of questions, aren't you? Wouldn't you be if the shoe was on the other foot and you just arrived? His lips made a tiny turn, and again he permitted his eyes to stay on me only a few moments longer. I guess, he finally admitted. Teresa's mother died in a car crash coming home from work. She was a chambermaid in the hotel in North Truro. Terrible accident. Man driving a tractor trailer lost control in the rain and crossed the road. Smacked her clear into the other world. Daddy says it was meant to be. How can something so terribly be meant to be? It was my father. It's what my father believes, he said. Is that why he doesn't seem one bit sad about my father's death, even though my father was his brother? It was meant to be? Carrie was silent. He kept his head down and kicked some sand. A particularly loud tern cried at the approaching storm. And your sister's death, I pursued, was that also meant to be? He looked at me, his eyes glistening with tears. I don't like talking about Laura's disappearance. If you keep sadness and pain bottled up, it swells up inside you until it bursts, I said. Grandma Arlene told me that. Yeah, well, I never had the pleasure of meeting Grandma Arlene, he replied. I'm going back to the house. Do what you want. Why did your father stop talking to my father? I demanded with my hands on my hips. He hesitated, then turned. He told me my daddy defied his parents. What did he mean by that? What did my daddy do to them? I don't know. But Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jacob must have talked about it often. I don't listen on their private talks, he said. Besides, it's over and done. Why talk about it now? I know. You've got to go with the tide. He widened his eyes and lifted his eyebrows. Well, I continued, sometimes you have to swim against the tide to be strong enough to get past it, too. Sometimes you don't give up and give in. Really, he said, amused by my defiance. Yes, really. Well, first chance I get, I'm going to take you out on my sailboat and let you buck the tide. Good. He shook his head with a smile widening. The girls in school told me Laura and her boyfriend went out on your sailboat. Was that so? The smile quickly faded. I have a different sailboat now, and I told you, he said, turning away, I don't like to talk about Laura's disappearance with anyone, especially strangers. I watched him walk away, his shoulders sagging, his head bent, and his hands clutched in fists. The wind grew stronger and whipped past me, catching my hair. Sand began to fly from the beach into my face. The small patches of blue disappeared from the sky, and now completely overcast with dark, brooding clouds. I could feel the ocean spray even from this far. It began to terrify me. How could weather change so rapidly? I started for the house, bucking the wind every step harder than once before. My feet slipped in the sand that gave way beneath them. It was harder than walking on ice. The wind was so strong my eyes began to tear. I had to keep them closed and pump my legs hard just to try to run. My blouse flapped over my breasts and ribs. Just before I reached the house, the first sheet of rain tore down, washing over me. I screamed and ran hard for the front door, and when I burst in, Carrie stood in the hallway with a look of glee in his eyes. I told you so, written on his lips. I hate it here, I screamed at him and charged up the stairway. The wind howled around the house and whistled through it. I thought it might take the roof off, but at that moment I didn't care. Let the sky fall, let the rain swell from the ocean and wash over this place, I thought. I embraced myself at the window. watching the trees bend to the point of breaking. The rain came down like bullets fired by God. The street was being pounded. I shuddered and stripped off my blouse and then rushed into the bathroom to get a towel for my hair. Moments later, when I emerged, Carrie was in the hallway. He glanced at me before I realized I was standing there in my bra. I draped my towel over myself. "I'm sorry," he said. He looked repentant. "I shouldn't have left you out there." "It was my own fault. I didn't listen," I admitted. "Where's May?" "She's in her room." Sometimes it's a blessing to be deaf," he said. "She can't hear how hard it's raining or blowing." "How do you say it's raining?" I asked. He demonstrated. "This means raining hard," he added and showed me. Then he smiled. "Not the same thing about being out there though, huh?" I relented and smiled. "No. Maybe you ain't such a landlubber after all," he allowed. He blushed before going into his room. It was the closest we had come to giving any kind of akin to a compliment. Daddy would say, "Be grateful for the little things." I went to my room to work on the needlepoint until it was time to help Aunt Sarah with dinner. Before it was time to go down, I heard a hard knock on my door. "Yes?" Carrie poked his head in. "I just thought I'd let you know what we do in case it's still raining in the morning." "What do we do?" "We walk faster," he said. For the first time since I came to Providencetown, I heard the sound of my own laughter.